All right, here we go with section 4. The majority of job growth occurred in the high and low ends of the pay scale, and manufacturing jobs for mostly males, those with limited education, but that offered middle class incomes, started to rebound from the low point in 2009, but still waned. African Americans suffered the most from the recession. Often, family wealth was invested in their homes instead of in stocks, and thus any stock market recovery was no help for bouncing back during the nation's slow climb out of the recession's low point. In 2016, the median family wealth for white families was 171,000, but that of black families was only 17,000. Black unemployment remained nearly double that of whites, and two-thirds of all black children lived in low-income families. Despite the grim reality, Obama's election spurred discussions of whether the United States had overcome its legacy of racial inequality. Talk proliferated of a new post racial America in which racial differences no longer affected public policy or private attitudes. In 2013, the Supreme Court used this logic to invalidate the heart of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and said that Southern states should no longer be required to get permission from the Justice Department before changing election laws. This decision unleashed a flood of laws limiting early voting and requiring voters to possess state issued identification. These measures were intended to limit the right to vote for poor people of all races, many of whom did not possess official IDs. A series of events involving the death of unarmed black men at the hands of police or other authorities also suggested that America was not post racial. The 2012 killing of Trayvon Martin, a black teenager killed by a white member of the Neighborhood Watch, who was later acquitted, shook the nation. In 2004, the 2014 murder of Eric Garner resulted from police using chokeholds despite being illegal, and a grand jury declined to press charges. These and others, including the shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, spurred the creation of a national movement, Black Lives Matter, which demanded that police practices be changed and officers who used excessive force be held accountable. The movement used social media to organize protests, and most content was created by bystanders using their cell phones. In Ferguson, Michael Brown's death inspired weeks of sometimes violent street demonstrations, leading to the deployment of National Guardsmen, and illustrated how many police departments still relied on excessive force in dealing with black men and that their criminal justice system remained racialized. Nationally, public reaction to the Black Lives Matter movement revealed a sharp divide between black and white Americans, with 80% of the former and only 30% of the latter agreeing that blacks are victims of discriminatory treatment by the police. The most dramatic foreign affairs achievement of Obama's first term was the ending of American involvement in the Iraq War, and by the end of 2011, the last American soldiers were home from Iraq. Yet Obama did not dismantle some of the presidential powers Bush had accumulated. While Obama completed his campaign pledge of U.S. withdrawal from Iraq, he dramatically increased the troop presence in Afghanistan. Obama found that criticizing presidential power from the outside is much different than actually dismantling it. He both continued military tribunals and the U.S. Patriot Act. In May 2011, to wide acclaim in the United States, Obama authorized an armed raid into Pakistan that resulted in the death of Osama bin Laden. That same year, Obama sent the Air Force to participate in the NATO campaign to overthrow Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi, resulting in an endless civil war and not the restoration of democracy. Throughout Obama's presidency, American troops or planes were involved in combat as part of an expanded war on terror. In 2014, Obama abandoned the half century old policy of isolating Cuba and moved to resume diplomatic relations with the island. The antagonism that had outlasted the Cold War proved ineffective, and the United States worked with the European Union, China, and Russia to resume a relationship after decades of hostility. In 2015, the United States played a major role in forging an agreement committing to reduce carbon emissions that contributed to climate change. Events overseas presented new challenges and opportunities for the Obama administration. Beginning in 2011, popular revolts swept the Middle East and toppled dictators in places like Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya. Freedom emerged as the rallying cry of activists, and the Obama administration used human rights as a political weapon while remaining silent about serious abuses conducted by war on terror allies. In his second term, Obama faced a new crisis when the self proclaimed Islamic State, or ISIS, took control of parts of Iraq, Syria, and Libya and began a campaign of exceptional brutality, including videos of horrific executions and sponsoring terrorist attacks around the world. By 2018, in the face of counterattacks by the United States and its allies, ISIS was on the defensive throughout the Middle East, having surrendered the territory it had occupied. Another area in which Obama continued the policies of Bush was governmental surveillance, both domestic and overseas. The extent of such activity became known in 2013 when Edward Snowden, a former employee of the National Security Agency, released documents online that detailed the NSA's programs that spied on foreign governments and extensively on American citizens themselves. The Obama administration charged Snowden with violating the Espionage Act of 1917, and to avoid prosecution, Snowden moved to Russia. In 2015, Congress approved a measure curtailing government surveillance of phone records, but much of the government's prying into Americans' communications continued. In nearly all midterm elections in American history, the party in power has lost congressional seats, but Democrats found it unusually difficult in 2010. Grassroots Republicans were energized by hostility towards Obama's sweeping legislative enactments. The Tea Party, named as a reference to the Boston Tea Party of the 1770s and inspired by its opposition to taxation by a faraway government, mobilized grassroots opposition to the administration. Obama and congressional Democrats could no longer get any significant legislation through Congress, but neither could Republicans because of the Democratic majority in the Senate. Instead, Tea Party inspired Republicans took their political agenda to the state level, and a number of states had legislation passed that limited voting rights, public employee union rights, and abortion rights and they took aim at undocumented immigrants. Despite the continuing economic crisis, sociocultural issues played a major role in the campaigning for the 2012 Republican presidential nomination. GOP candidates vied for the support of evangelical Christians who formed the party's base and worked to bring in support from the Tea Party faction. Mitt Romney won the GOP's presidential nomination, and Paul Ryan won that of the vice presidency. Obama retained the Democratic Party's nomination for re-election. Despite a number of political liabilities gained during his first term, Obama won re-election in 2012 with 51% of the popular vote to Romney's 47%. Obama's victory was in part due to his Get Out the Vote organization on Election Day and Romney's weaknesses as a campaigner. He was viewed as a millionaire who used loopholes to avoid paying taxes and who ordinary people held in contempt. But more important was the new diversity of the United States. Although Romney won 60% of the white vote, which would have previously guaranteed victory, Obama won 90% of the black vote and over 70% of Asians and Hispanics. One of the most striking realities of the year's federal elections was the Supreme Court ruling in Citizens United versus Federal Elections Committee that political action committees, or PACs, were allowed to spend as much as they wanted on campaigns, thus bringing the joint cost of presidential and congressional campaigning that year to over $6 billion. So that's the end of Section 4. We'll be back for Section 5.